Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kyle Foley Experience. We are coming up on Super Tuesday, the biggest day in the Republican primary and the Democrat primary as well. We're all looking forward to it. A lot of big stuff that's going to be happening. We just came from a huge debate where Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz both really stuck it to Donald Trump. So we're going to see what effect, if any, that had on the race going forward. Today, I'm joined by Evan Schrage from Outset Magazine. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I am a first-year law student at Loyola University Chicago. For that, I was at Michigan State, where I was pretty active in GOP politics over there. And now I write columns and such for Outset Magazine. And that's there's probably more, but that'll do for now, I suppose.
Awesome. Well, it's really good to have you on. Evan and I have been on a few things before together, so it's really good to have him back and get to chat with him a little bit. So the debate last night, that was pretty entertaining, pretty fun to watch. A little bit of a different Marco Rubio that we saw. What were your thoughts watching how he performed and the attitude that he came out with?
Well, I think Donald Trump slowly started to realize that he can't really say anybody has low energy anymore. I think that it's a whole different ballgame now, especially that the race has kind of dwindled to 5 people, but really 3. Carson and Kasich don't really have get the least amount of speaking time, obviously. But I was surprised because not only was Rubio and Cruz, they were throwing punches, but they were landing them effectively too. And you saw that with Trump stumbling over his words a few times, not really knowing how to respond to some of the allegations that they were making. So overall, I thought it's a debate that we haven't had in a while because it was policy, but it was also effective from a standpoint of painting a realistic picture of Trump that I don't think many people have seen.
Yeah, that's what I thought was really interesting. We look back at past debates. Jeb Bush had hit Donald Trump a few times. It maybe landed 1 or 2 in all those debates. And that was the key difference, was that here were attacks that actually hit. I think the biggest thing was when Trump says, "Oh, that's not true." Marco Rubio said, "Well, the people can Google it." And if you look at the Google reports, people Googled it. People were tracking the statistics there. People were Googling Trump Polish and looking up that kind of stuff like Rubio said. So it was really interesting. And we'll kind of see how that plays out going into Super Tuesday. But it was definitely different. We did also have John Kasich and Ben Carson on the stage. I know you mentioned it's a 5-man race. Everybody knows right now the 3 main primary guys. But Ben Carson and John Kasich are still in this. Why?
Well, the 2 different answers to that question. One, Carson is on it, in my opinion, just in it to sell more of his books, and maybe tack on for a secretary position later on. He says he doesn't want that, but that's kind of how the game works. Kasich is in this race because all of the primaries that we've had so far have taken place in the lower Midwest and the South, or that we will have on Super Tuesday, with the exception of Massachusetts and Vermont. So he's really trying to hold out as long as he can to get to those states like New York, where he has the endorsement of the New York Times, like Ohio, his home state, to where he can be more influential. And so I don't think good things always come to those who wait, but that's the strategy that he seems to be running with at this point.
Right. And we're going to get into the Super Tuesday stuff with the main 3 candidates in a couple minutes. But is it realistic for John Kasich to expect to come out of this thing with a nomination? I mean, he says it is. He says he has a chance. A lot of us are really, really skeptical and cynical of that. A lot of us kind of talking a little bit of trash about it. But we think he's in there. It's more of a self-serving thing. And in the end, it's going to help Donald Trump more than anything. But do you think there's a genuine chance of him coming out of those states, winning enough delegates to win the nomination?
Unfortunately, no. He has 6 delegates as of this very moment, and that just came from mostly New Hampshire, where he came in 2nd place. He's must be hoping for a brokered kind of convention, and he's really hoping that either Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio have some sort of skeleton in their closet that he can play into as the convention draws near. Because and we'll get into Super Tuesday a little bit later, but as of this moment, nobody has enough delegates to claim the nomination or will pretty much after Super Tuesday. So it's still anybody's race. But I'm not convinced that John Kasich can appeal to enough people that, especially in the closed primary states, are not where it's just Republicans and way more conservative than Kasich is ideologically, that he can appeal to where he's going to win any meaningful amount of delegates that can catapult him to the nomination.
Right. Now, the other thing that people have brought up, and this is a theory that I don't necessarily subscribe to, but I'm getting close to it. We just saw today Governor Chris Christie came out and endorsed Donald Trump after relentlessly attacking him throughout his own campaign, saying that Donald Trump was not presidential. He was damaging to the title of president, among other things. And now he comes out and endorses him and says he's the best choice. Is this something that in the end John Kasich does an about face, does a 180 and comes back and says, hey, Donald Trump's the guy? I know the theory is that what he's doing is helping Trump regardless of his motives. But the thought is maybe there's something in it. Maybe there's something that's been offered that, hey, stay in this long enough to guarantee that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz can't beat me, and then there will be something for you in the end. Is that something that you think could be a possibility, or is that just a far out there theory?
I don't think that's the case. I think Governor Kasich has given a lot of his life to public service, and so I really think he's actually trying to be that, happy warrior type person that can really kind of bridge a gap that's been, fractured in the gap that's been fractured in the GOP for so very long. Kasich isn't necessarily going to draw enough votes away from either Cruz or Rubio, in my opinion, especially in any of these states that are coming up, to where even if Kasich were to drop out, Trump would be in danger of losing. But so I can't really say that he's going to do it just to get into Donald Trump's good graces, because with the way the country's working right now, there's nothing that he could really offer Kasich that would be a good reason to keep staying in the race. So that's why I think it has something to do with he actually wants to bridge that gap.
Right. Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing I hear from a lot of his supporters, is that he's doing this. This is a genuine thing. This is him. This is what he believes. This is how he feels. I think he's a self-absorbed douchebag for staying in the race, and I have no problem saying that, because I think him and Carson right now, the only thing they're doing is helping Donald Trump. And they'll tell you that they think they can win this, and they'll tell you that they have a shot. But you're right, Kasich will do well. Now, you said you don't think Kasich will draw away from Rubio or Cruz, especially in the southern states, but it's those northern states that he will. It's the Ohio, the Pennsylvania, the states that are up there where he really has, Illinois, where he's going to take away votes, just like in New Hampshire, that he would from someone who actually has a shot at winning the nomination. And so in the end, it's one of those things that could really hurt, because a second-place Kasich and a third-place Rubio in Ohio, because I don't think Kasich is going to win Ohio, but a second-place Kasich and a third-place Rubio is a lot different than a second-place Rubio and a third-place Cruz. There's a huge factor that he's going to pull away from, and he is going to pull a lot of votes, especially in his own state of Ohio. So I think that's something that's really dangerous, that the longer he stays in, the more he is going to harm. And I think if by March 2nd he's still in the race, I think it could be incredibly dangerous. And I think we may be at the point where we say Donald Trump may run away with this and he may not, barring any drastic kind of union or alliance made between Cruz and Rubio, which is a whole other bag of worms that I don't think will really happen. But so we're going into Super Tuesday, and for the Republicans, we have 661 delegates at stake, which is 26% of the delegates for the nomination. So obviously a clean sweep of this would be huge for anyone. It would be huge for Donald Trump. But we've got 661 available out of the 1,237 needed for the nomination. We've also, on the Democrat side, there's 1,017 delegates up for grabs. The Democrats are a little different with all the way it all works with all the super delegates. Yeah, yes. It's a little more complicated, but it's there. So we've got that going on as well. But let's look at the Republican side. Let's look at some of these big states. We've obviously got Texas is the big one. Yes. We've got Texas with 155 delegates. That's Ted Cruz's home state. Some polls are showing him winning by a lot. Some polls are showing him tied with Donald Trump. when we look at Texas, when we look at what's happened, first of all, before we even get into that, do you think the debate that we just had is going to make a huge difference in Texas, seeing as the debate happened in Texas, kind of like we saw in New Hampshire, where the bad performance by Marco Rubio really hurt him in New Hampshire? Do you think we'll see something like that in Texas?
I'm not entirely because Cruz had a much better debate in Texas than Marco Rubio had in New Hampshire. So the 538 average right now has Cruz at about an 82% chance of winning Texas. But when we say win, especially on the Republican side, we have to remember that all of these are proportionately allocated states. So
right.
Cruz wins by 51%. He wins, but he only gets half of those delegates, and not, the Cruz and Kasich and some of them could theoretically still pick off a few. As far as Texas goes, though, I don't think it's going to help him anymore. He might get one or two more delegates percentage-wise than he would have gotten, but he already had the endorsement of Governor Greg Abbott and other prominent Texas legislators. I don't think he actually has any Texas U.S. representatives endorsing him yet. He might. I have to check on that. But other than that, Texas is Cruz's game to state to lose at this point.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's anticipating him losing Texas. I think the thing that could be huge, though, is if we see a strong performance. One of the things I've pointed out regularly is that in the states that Marco Rubio has done well, I'm going to discount New Hampshire because he had the bad debate performance. I'm also going to discount Nevada because that was just a nightmare. But when you look at Iowa and when you look at South Carolina, Marco Rubio performed 9 points better than his poll average. So when we look at some of these polls and we're looking at, okay, how's this going to go? It's really hard to judge because when you do 9 points better, you've got that margin of error now that we don't know which way it's going to go. Is he going to do that much better? Is he not? Is the debate going to help? Is it not? And it's one of those things where if that does help and we've got a close three-man race there at the top, like you said, it's proportional delegates that are going out. So it's not like Cruz is going to win 90 delegates and the other 60 are going to get split between Trump and Rubio. It's something that could be really close. So I think the momentum of winning helps. But I also think really what it's for is that Ted Cruz losing Texas would be a lot more effective, negatively, of course, but a lot more effective than him winning Texas, because I think it is his state to lose. So him winning isn't big news, but him losing would definitely be big news, and it could be an issue. We've also got the other states that have primaries on Super Tuesday are Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Virginia, Vermont, and Massachusetts. We've also got a few caucuses: Minnesota, Wyoming, Colorado, and Alaska. With the caucuses, we don't know what to expect. We could have something like Iowa, which is a little more normal. We could have something like Nevada, which I don't think we will ever have anything that bad again. But those ones will be a little different. But we look at some of these states. We look at Virginia, Oklahoma. Rubio's been surging up in the polls. He's in second in a lot of those states. Cruz is dropping out. Cruz just announced yesterday in Alabama he would not be attending a candidate forum hosted at Samford University. He had announced that he would not be participating in that. Is that a sign that he's kind of given up on Alabama?
Well, Alabama's got 50 delegates right now up for grabs, and Trump is kind of pulling away. Like I mentioned, the 538 average. Trump's got a 77% chance of winning Alabama this time. Rubio comes in second at 21% chance. So by that, and that's the kind of the case along the board, unfortunately, is that Cruz is starting to come in third, and that's really a problem in the South, in the Bible Belt, where these are his people still, that the evangelicals, the hardcore believers that he's been trying to appeal to this entire time. You saw this with his Iowa speech and how he was still trying to court the evangelicals and the Catholics and Protestants kind of across the board. And so for him to kind of say to do these things, not go to candidate forums, not go to where he should be winning already, is kind of a sign, I think, that he's really kind of putting all of his eggs into Texas, at this point, because that's how he keeps his narrative alive. His whole thing right now has just been, well, I'm the only candidate to have beaten Donald Trump. And that's true in Iowa, where he took, votes away from Ben Carson by claiming he was going to drop out. But, if he wins Texas, again, he should have won Texas anyway. So this kind of narrative, it doesn't really make sense why he would be abandoning the South, where he really needs to pick up delegates and court the people that he's kind of based his whole campaign on.
Yeah, it seems like he's spending a lot more of his time right now in Texas than anywhere else, which I the same as you. I find it really interesting that he's spending a lot of time in his own state versus the other states that there's a chance he could, because he's not going to finish first in those other states. I don't think that's really the conversation. The conversation is who's going to finish in second. One of the things that we look at with that is because after Super Tuesday, the arguments for one of either Rubio or Cruz to drop are going to multiply, and they're going to be magnified way more than they are now. We already talk a lot about how one or the other needs to drop out. We've really been talking about that since New Hampshire. I say we, but I mean people have been talking about it. So it's kind of interesting. But we look at Super Tuesday. So if Ted Cruz wins Texas and then finishes third, I don't think he'll finish any worse. But if he finishes third in every other state that we have that day, does he? And one of the arguments is leverage to say, hey, Marco, if I drop out now, I want that Supreme Court seat, or I want that vice president nomination. I want to be chosen as your VP, and I'll come and I'll back you so we can beat Trump. But if he finishes in third in all those states, does he then lose any leverage that he might have had in a deal like that?
I don't think he necessarily does. If he wins Texas, for example, and Marco comes in second everywhere else, he can still push that narrative that he's the only candidate that's ever beaten Donald Trump in a primary. And so I actually think it's worse for Rubio if Cruz wins Texas for exactly that reason, because he keeps him pushing the narrative. And yeah, some people see through the lines, like we were talking, Cruz should have won Texas anyway, but it's not, it allows him to keep it alive for longer periods of time than it's really healthy for anybody who's watching the campaigns to stomach. So that seems to be what the case is going to be right now. Rubio is going to come in second pretty much everywhere. Cruz in a distant third, except for Texas. And, especially with Florida coming up after that, if Rubio can't win Florida, but Cruz won Texas, it seems like that would be kind of more of a game changer than whether or not Cruz wins Texas and then comes in third everywhere else.
Yeah, obviously if Rubio coming up on the 15th, if he loses in Florida, that's a huge opportunity for the Cruz campaign to say, look, we won our state. He couldn't win his. And I think I may disagree with it. I may not like it, but I do think it's a fair narrative to use. He is the only one who has beaten Donald Trump, and that is something that the voters are really buying into, the donors are really buying into, and it's effective. And so again, I may not like it, but it works. and if it were my candidate, I would say the same thing. So I mean, it's easy to sit on one side and say I don't like it. If it were my guy, I would obviously be saying the same thing, no problem. But it is going to be interesting. The other thing, there are a few states, I know Oklahoma being one of them, and possibly Virginia, where there's a lot of rumblings about Marco Rubio coming from behind and winning those states. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that one of those could happen, that he could either win Oklahoma or Virginia? Or is there a possibility that there's another state he might come out and surprise us in?
Yeah, so definitely in Oklahoma right now, he, according to 538, he was trailing by about 4 points, Trump about 4 points. And that's actually significant because Oklahoma consistently, every county in that state will go Republican in the general election. Like that is the most Republican state, in the union practically. Virginia right now, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any surprise, but Arkansas actually, there hasn't been much polling out of Arkansas, but at the beginning of February, Rubio was trailing. Ted Cruz was actually in front, but was trailing Ted Cruz by about 4 points. Rubio has the endorsement of Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas right now. So that, I think, might be his play to make in Arkansas right now, if he can go in and maybe come from behind there. Other than that, I'm not seeing any sort of surprises other than Oklahoma, like I just said.
Yeah, I agree. I think Oklahoma could be one that he really stands a good shot at winning, only being down 4 points. Is obviously, like I pointed out earlier, He performed 9 points over what he was expected in Iowa and in South Carolina. If he performs 9 points over what he was expected in Oklahoma as of right now, he wins the state. And that's something that kind of busts up the Cruz narrative of I'm the only one who's beaten Donald Trump, because then Rubio is able to come out and obviously say, well, not anymore. I just did it. So it could be really interesting. Obviously, we'll expect strong performances from Rubio in a lot of these states. We've seen him overwhelmingly take over as the second place option and establish himself as the anti-Trump, so to say. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch out on the Republican side. Then we move over to the Democrat side. Yes. Something that I don't think anybody anticipates Bernie Sanders winning any of these southern states. I don't expect Bernie Sanders really to win anything. But at this point, with all of the grassroots support that he has, and obviously Debbie Wasserman Schultz had said the reason the party is set up the way it is, the way they set up their primary nomination, is so that the grassroots candidate cannot win. And she openly said that. So let's just, the Republicans are the ones who hate the voters and democracy and whatnot, that stupid narrative. But so they've got this set up so that Hillary is going to win. But that being said, is there any hope that Bernie Sanders can come out of Super Tuesday on the Democrat side and still be in this race?
No. There's about 1,000 delegates up for grabs on Tuesday. Hillary Clinton is guaranteed a 99% chance or better of winning Texas with 252 delegates, Virginia with 110 delegates, and Arkansas 37, and Georgia, did I say Georgia? With 116. And even then, her delegate count in some of these other areas like Massachusetts, Oklahoma, there is not a single place where she doesn't have the delegate count locked up right now, other than because it's his home state. But this is going to be a significant blow to the Sanders campaign. And we have to remember, Clinton already has 500 of the delegates needed to win the nomination. You only need about 2,400, I think. So she's going to be picking up. And when we say 99% chance, it's probably going to be about 2-1 that she's going to beat him by. So we're looking at, around 600 delegates that she's going to pick up on Tuesday. That's that's just under halfway there. And a lot of those are actually from the super delegates already, the 400 or the 500 that she already has. So it's kind of been put away already before half the country's even voted on a primary.
Yeah. Now don't tell college students that, because they will freak out, because I talk to a lot of them all the time. And there's this sense that Bernie Sanders is going to win and magically make everything free. I still haven't gotten an answer on how he's going to do that, but supposedly everything's going to be free. College is going to grow on trees. Healthcare is going to be given to us by healthcare fairies, and Wall Street speculation is going to pay for that. Although when you ask them what Wall Street speculation is, they never have an answer. It's interesting. So we look at Super Tuesday. We obviously look at Hillary Clinton's going to run away with this thing. Bernie will win one state, his home state. If he loses that, God help us all. Does he drop? I mean, does he drop on March 2nd? Does he keep going because of all this grassroots support he's got? Because typically, if you get swept on Super Tuesday, I mean, you're going to be done. But with all of his grassroots support, with the millions of supporters and millions of dollars pouring in, does he stay in this thing till the end because he's got the support behind him, or does he at some point say, I'm done? And is that point going to be on Wednesday?
I don't think it'll be on Wednesday. I think when Hillary Clinton locks up, because again, remember, a lot of these states like the South the states in the South that are coming up, these are states with high proportions of minorities in them where Sanders doesn't do very well. So he's kind of and remember, we have South Carolina coming up tomorrow for the Democrats, and that another one Hillary's guaranteed a 99% chance to win. So he, I think, is going to stay in for a little bit longer, because there's a lot of other states that, especially in the Northeast, that have yet to come out yet, that he could theoretically do very well in. Not New York, obviously, probably, because Hillary Clinton was a former senator from there, but he might hold on and just hope that these will produce him the proportionate, he can win. He has to win by a lot more of a percentage than he has been winning if he really kind of hopes to remain competitive.
Yeah, I think at this point it's one of those things where he's going to look back and say, well, we fought a good race. One of the things we've talked about, I've talked about this with a lot of people, is that when he does eventually drop, he's going to be able to say, well, look, we did pretty well. And then in 4 or 8 years, depending on who is elected and how that all goes, we get a 40-something-year-old socialist who's able to say, well, look, I was a part of this Bernie revolution. And this is something that we have to also take into effect when we look at who we're nominating from the Republican side. It's the reason why nominating someone like Donald Trump is so scary, because he's just going to, he's going to piss everyone off on both sides. But it leads to this vacuum where somebody could come in 8 years, this 40-year-old minority socialist, more extreme than Barack Obama, who's able to say, well, Bernie Sanders tried. It wasn't enough. Here I am. We're going to nail this, because it's a 40-year-old minority. It's not some 95,000-year-old white guy. So there's no – and he's not fighting someone like Hillary Clinton, who is an unprecedented opponent for most people. The reason Barack Obama was able to win, I would argue, is because of his more socialist views, which at the time were a little more extreme. He wasn't an open socialist. It wasn't anything like what we've got now, but he was just more of that outside-ish candidate, and he was the young minority, and I think that was something that really struck a chord with a lot of people. So I think it's something we could see a young Latino in 8 years running from the Democrat side.
One of the Castro brothers probably would be the most likely.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's what could happen. The better Bernie Sanders does in this thing, the more of an issue we're going to have in a few years down the road when we have to look at it. So that's something, I know it's something a lot of people won't ever think about, and a lot of people probably say is insignificant. But as a young person who works daily with college students, talking to them about these different things, I know how their minds work. I know that their minds do not work. I know that it's very, for the most part, not for the conservatives.
I was a college student. Wait a minute, yeah.
we tend to be a little smarter on the conservative side, but they look at this and they say, we want the one that either says what we really want to hear or looks like we can relate to them. I mean, you ask a lot of them why they like Obama, and it's, well, he did that BuzzFeed video that was super cool. Or he's black, which, are dumb reasons to like someone, but hey, that's the Democrat Party for you. But it's something that's going to be really interesting in a few years when we look back. And that's why the Republican Party needs to make sure that they nominate someone who's not going to do the exact same thing that Barack Obama has done to Republicans, which is anger them, unite them against him. I mean, because that's one of the things Barack Obama has done really well, is he's angered the Republicans and he's united them against him. Maybe not now in the presidential election, but in the congressional elections, in the Senate, all those things, we were able to take over those houses because people were pissed at Obama and people wanted to make a change. And so that's something that could really happen. And then in 4 to 8 years, we've got this young guy coming in who says, well, hey, look, socialism's cool now. We tried it. It didn't work, but we're going to try it again, and it is going to work. And I think that's more scary than absolutely anything we could face. But yeah, I don't think he drops. I think Bernie Sanders is going to stay in for a while. I think this political revolution isn't happening now. I am a little worried it happens farther down the road. It is a possibility, and it's something that could be a little destructive, to say the least. It could be, it'll be interesting to see.
Well, and that's on the Republican Party, I think, to not nominate self-funding billionaires who can, play into that kind of narrative. Because if things don't get better, if the Republican who wins, and I still think it'll be a Republican, even if it's Donald Trump, he probably could still beat Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. It just fuels that narrative, and eventually it'll, happen. And this is kind of what we've seen with the Republicans, Pat Buchanan, Ross Perot, these kind of more protectionist type people have been trying to infiltrate the party for a very long time. And they finally found it in the media mogul personality that is Donald Trump. And he just did it in a way that he's used technology in a way his entire life that certainly no Republican candidate has ever done. But he's kind of, and I'm not saying he's like based his whole life on off the opportunity to run for president, but he, like Barack Obama, who used media in a way nobody had ever done it before, he knows how to be appealing to people that have televisions.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. Super Tuesday is going to be interesting. Going forward, it's going to be really interesting. Evan, thanks a lot for coming on and talking with me. It was really great to talk about this. Everybody, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.